What are you doing to my boys? Jacob Whitaker's voice trembles with shock. In a Chicago mansion, his 8-year-old twin sons, Liam and Lucas, white and born blind, live in darkness and sorrow. Jacob, a white biotech billionaire, has spent millions on doctors, yet none offer hope. That morning, he steps into the kitchen for coffee and freezes. Nyasha Williams, a black maid from Chicago's impoverished South Side, traces shadows on the wall with her fingers. Liam and Lucas laugh, their first response to light and shadow, stunning Jacob as hope sparks in his heart. Could Nyasha unlock their hidden sight? What secret lies behind their diagnosis? Will justice prevail? Stay tuned to uncover a truth that will leave you speechless. Jacob Whitaker stood alone in the vast kitchen of his Chicago mansion, the gleam of polished marble countertops reflecting the dim glow of dawn filtering through towering windows. The silence was deafening, a cruel reminder of the void that had swallowed his life. His heart, once buoyant with dreams of family and legacy, now thudded heavily, weighed down by years of unanswered prayers. At 41, the white biotech billionaire had conquered boardrooms, built empires, but could not conquer the darkness that enveloped his twin sons, Liam and Lucas. 8 years old, white like their father, they were born blind, their eyes forever sealed from the world's colors, shapes, and joys. Jacob's fingers tightened around the edge of the counter, his knuckles pale, as he fought the familiar ache that clawed at his chest. He turned his gaze to the adjacent living room, where Liam and Lucas sat on a plush rug, their small hands fumbling with tactile toys, blocks and textured balls designed for the blind. Their movements were mechanical, devoid of the spark that should light a child's face. Jacob's throat constricted as he watched Liam stack a block, only for it to topple, his son's expression unchanging, as if the world's failures no longer surprised him. Lucas, beside him, traced a toy's grooves with his fingers, his lips pressed into a thin line, silent as always. The twins' world was one of shadows, not just in sight but in spirit, and Jacob felt the weight of their sorrow as if it were his own. He had lost his wife, Emily, in a tragic accident during their birth, a wound that never healed. But the greater torment was watching his boys live without the light she had promised to show them. Jacob's mind drifted to the countless nights he'd spent poring over medical reports, each one a dagger to his hopes. He'd flown the twins to specialists across the globe, New York, London, Tokyo, spending millions on consultations, experimental treatments, and cutting-edge scans. The best ophthalmologists, with their sterile offices and colder verdicts, offered nothing but the same crushing word: impossible. Dr. Leonard Carter, the lead specialist in Chicago, had been the most adamant, his voice clipped as he delivered the diagnosis. Congenital blindness, untreatable. They'll never see. Jacob had clung to every syllable, searching for a crack in the prognosis, a sliver of possibility. But each visit ended the same: empty promises and emptier bank accounts. The reports piled up on his desk, a monument to his failure as a father. He crossed the kitchen, his footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, and paused at the threshold to the living room. The twins didn't look up, their focus locked on their toys, as if the world beyond their touch didn't exist. Jacob's heart twisted. "Boys," he said softly, his voice breaking the silence, like a stone dropped into still water. No response. He knelt beside them, reaching out to touch Liam's shoulder, but the boy didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge him. Lucas tilted his head slightly, as if sensing his father's presence, but his face remained blank. Jacob's hand fell away, the gesture futile. He wanted to scream, to shake the heavens until they gave him answers, but all he could do was whisper, "I'm trying, boys, I'm trying." The memory of Emily haunted him in these moments. She'd been his anchor, her laughter a melody that once filled this house. She'd dreamed of teaching their boys to chase fireflies, to marvel at sunsets. Now those dreams were ashes, and Jacob was left to carry them alone. He stood, his chest tight, and returned to the kitchen, where a stack of unopened medical bills lay on the counter. He flipped through them, the numbers blurring into meaningless digits. Millions spent, and for what? To confirm that his sons would never see the world he'd built for them. The injustice of it burned, a fire that no amount of wealth could extinguish. He thought of the specialists' faces, their pitying glances as they handed him yet another report. Dr. Carter's words echoed, "You must accept their condition, Mr. Whitaker. Focus on their quality of life." Quality of life? Jacob's jaw clenched. What kind of life was this, trapped in darkness, cut off from the world's beauty? He'd hired nannies, therapists, and aides, each promising breakthroughs, each leaving after weeks of failure. The current nanny, Helen, was no different, competent but detached, her presence more obligation than care. She sat in the living room now, flipping through a magazine, oblivious to the twins' silent struggle. Jacob's frustration simmered. He needed more than competence. He needed a miracle. The kitchen's silence was broken by the soft hum of the refrigerator, a mundane sound that felt mocking in its normalcy. Jacob leaned against the counter, his reflection distorted in the stainless steel. He saw a man worn beyond his years, lines etched deep from sleepless nights and unanswered questions. He'd built a biotech empire, revolutionized medical technology, yet couldn't save his own sons. The irony was a bitter pill, one he swallowed daily. He closed his eyes, trying to summon Emily's face, her voice, but all he saw was darkness, the same darkness that held his boys captive. A faint sound, Liam dropping a block, snapped him back. He crossed to the living room again, driven by a desperate need to connect. "Do you want to try something new today?" he asked, his voice tinged with forced hope. The twins didn't respond, their hands moving mechanically. Jacob's shoulders sagged. He'd read about therapies, music, tactile games, even experimental surgeries, but nothing had worked. The specialists had drained his hope as surely as they drained his accounts. He knelt again, closer this time, and whispered, "I won't give up on you. I promise." The words felt hollow, a vow he wasn't sure he could keep. He stood, glancing at Helen, who barely looked up from her magazine. "Helen, engage with them today," he said, his tone sharper than intended. She nodded, uninterested, and Jacob's frustration flared. He needed someone who cared, someone who saw his boys as more than a job. He returned to the kitchen, his mind racing. There had to be a way, a doctor, a method he hadn't tried. The thought of another day in the silent prison was unbearable. He poured a coffee, the routine grounding him, but his hands trembled as he lifted the cup. The weight of his failure pressed down, a suffocating force. Jacob's thoughts were interrupted by the doorbell's chime, sharp and intrusive. He frowned, not expecting anyone. The housekeeper's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Whitaker, a candidate for the maid position is here." Jacob sighed. Another hire, another fleeting presence in this house of shadows. He didn't know that this arrival would soon shatter everything he believed about his son's fate. But for now he stood alone, a father lost in a world without light, clinging to a hope that felt more like a dream than a possibility. The doorbell's chime still lingered in the air, a sharp note that seemed to pierce the heavy silence of Jacob Whitaker's world. He set his coffee cup down, the porcelain clinking against the marble counter, and straightened, his heart a tangle of weariness and faint curiosity. Another maid, another fleeting presence in this house of shadows. Nothing more, he told himself. Yet as he crossed the threshold from the kitchen to the grand foyer, something stirred within him, a whisper of possibility he couldn't name. The white billionaire, his face etched with the exhaustion of a father who'd fought too long against an unyielding fate, braced himself for another disappointment. But the woman who stepped through the door was no ordinary stranger, and her presence would soon ripple through the lives of his blind twin sons, Liam and Lucas. Nyasha Williams stood in the foyer, her posture steady despite the opulence that dwarfed her. A black woman from Chicago's South Side, she carried the weight of a life forged in struggle, where every step forward was a battle won. Her dark eyes scanned the room, not with awe, but with quiet resolve, as if she'd faced grander challenges than marble columns and chandeliers. She clutched a worn folder, her application a humble testament to years of cleaning houses to survive. But beneath her unassuming exterior burned a fire, kindled by memories of her sister Amani, who had been born blind, just like Liam and Lucas. Nyasha's heart ached as she remembered Amani's laughter, the way her sister's fingers danced over textured books, finding joy in a world she could not see. That joy had been Nyasha's beacon, guiding her to learn the language of touch and sound, a language she believed could reach any heart, no matter how lost. Jacob approached, his steps measured, his gaze guarded. "Ms. William," he said, his voice clipped but not unkind. "I'm Jacob Whitaker. You're here for the maid position?" Nyasha nodded, her expression calm but unwavering. "Yes, sir. I'm ready to work hard and keep your home spotless." Her words were simple, but there was a strength in them, a conviction that made Jacob pause. He studied her, searching for the usual deference he'd seen in others, but found none. Instead, there was a quiet dignity, a spark that unsettled him. He gestured toward a small office off the foyer, where they could talk. As they walked, Nyasha's eyes caught the faint sound of blocks clattering in the distance, and her heart skipped a beat. She knew that sound, the careful, searching movements of children who live by touch alone. In the office, Jacob sat behind a mahogany desk, his fingers tracing the edge of a medical report he hadn't the strength to open again. "Your resume says you've worked in several homes," he said, glancing at the folder. "This house is large, demanding. My sons have special needs. They're blind, and I expect you to focus on cleaning, not their care. Helen, their nanny, handles that." His voice hardened at the mention of his sons, a protective shield against the pity he'd grown to despise. Nyasha nodded, but her mind was elsewhere, drawn to the memory of Amani's small hands clutching hers as they explored the world together. She'd taught her sister to see through sound, tapping rhythms on tables, humming melodies to mark spaces. "I understand, sir," she said, her voice soft but steady. "I'll do my job and stay out of the way." But Nyasha's heart rebelled against those words. As Jacob spoke of schedules and expectations, she heard the clatter of blocks again, faint through the walls. Her chest tightened, a surge of empathy for the boys she hadn't yet met. She remembered Amani's frustration, the way her sister would withdraw when others treated her blindness as a cage. Nyasha had refused to let Amani fade into silence, using every trick, clapping, singing, even tracing shapes in the air, to pull her back. She wondered about Liam and Lucas, these boys she'd only glimpsed in Jacob's guarded words. Were they as lost as Amani had once been? Did anyone try to reach them, or were they left to drown in their darkness? Jacob's voice pulled her back. "You'll start tomorrow, 6 a.m. sharp. Any questions?" His tone was final, a man accustomed to control, yet his eyes betrayed a flicker of desperation, a father clinging to the edge of hope. Nyasha met his gaze, her own eyes burning with a resolve she couldn't voice. "No questions, sir," she said, but her mind raced. She thought of Amani's triumph when she first traced a star's shape with her fingers, a victory no doctor had predicted. Nyasha had learned then that the impossible was only a wall waiting to be broken. She stood, shaking Jacob's hand, her grip firm, a silent promise to herself that she'd find a way to reach his sons. As she left the office, Nyasha paused in the foyer, catching sight of Liam and Lucas through the open living room door. The white twins sat cross-legged on the rug, their hands moving slowly over tactile toys, their faces blank. Helen, the nanny, sat nearby, her nose buried in a magazine, oblivious to the boys' quiet despair. Nyasha's heart clenched, a familiar ache from years of watching Amani struggle against a world that didn't try to understand. She saw the same isolation in Liam and Lucas, the same unspoken plea for someone to see beyond their blindness. Her fingers twitched, itching to tap a rhythm, to offer a bridge to their world. But she held back, mindful of Jacob's warning. Jacob watched her go, his chest heavy with a mix of skepticism and something he couldn't name. Hope, perhaps, or merely the ghost of it. He returned to the living room, kneeling beside his sons. "Liam, Lucas," he whispered, his voice cracking. They didn't respond, their hands still fumbling with toys. He touched Lucas's shoulder, but the boy didn't stir, lost in his silent world. Jacob's eyes stung, the weight of his failure crushing him. He'd built an empire, but here with his sons, he was powerless. He stood, glancing at Helen, who barely looked up. "Do something with them today," he said, his voice sharp. Helen nodded, uninterested, and Jacob's frustration boiled. He needed more than this, someone who cared, someone who could reach his boys where he could not. As Nyasha stepped outside, the South Side's gritty air greeted her, a stark contrast to the mansion's sterile grandeur. She thought of Amani, of the nights they'd spent tapping rhythms under the stars, defying the darkness. Nyasha's resolve hardened. She didn't know how, but she'd find a way to help Liam and Lucas, to give them what Amani had found, a way to shine despite their blindness. She clutched her folder, her heart pounding with purpose, unaware that her arrival had already set in motion a chain of events that would challenge everything Jacob believed possible. Nyasha Williams stepped into the Whitaker mansion at dawn, her heart still thrumming with the resolve kindled the previous day. The echo of her sister Amani's laughter, a melody that had once defied the darkness of blindness, pulsed in her veins as she carried her cleaning supplies. The black woman from Chicago's South Side felt the weight of Jacob's warning, to focus on cleaning, not his sons, but her soul rebelled. She'd seen the silent plea in Liam and Lucas's eyes, a mirror of Amani's own, and she couldn't turn away. As she crossed the foyer, the faint clatter of blocks from the living room reached her ears. A siren called to her heart. Nasha's fingers tightened around her bag, a quiet vow forming. She would find a way to reach those boys, no matter the cost. The kitchen gleamed under the morning light, its marble surfaces a cold contrast to the warmth Nyasha carried within. She set her supplies down, her movements deliberate, but her eyes kept darting toward the living room. Liam and Lucas, the white 8-year-old twins, sat on the rug, their hands tracing tactile toys with mechanical precision. Their faces, pale and expressionless, bore the weight of a world they could not see. Nyasha's chest ached, memories of Amani flooding back, her sister's small hands clutching hers, finding joy in the rhythm of a tapped table or the hum of a lullaby. Nyasha had learned then that blindness didn't mean absence. It meant finding new ways to see. She glanced at Helen, the nanny, slouched in an armchair, her nose buried in a magazine, oblivious to the twins' silent despair. Nyasha's jaw tightened, a spark of defiance igniting. These boys deserved more. She began wiping down the counter, her cloth moving in slow, rhythmic circles. But her mind was elsewhere. As she worked, she noticed the sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, casting soft shadows on the wall. An idea flickered, born from nights spent with Amani, when Nyasha would trace shapes in the air to show her sister the world. She hesitated, Jacob's stern words echoing in her mind. Stay out of their care. But the clatter of a falling block, followed by Liam's faint sigh, shattered her restraint. She glanced at Helen, still engrossed in her magazine, and made her choice. Nyasha stepped closer to the window, her heart pounding with a mix of fear and hope. She raised her hands, letting her fingers dance in the sunlight, casting the shadow of a bird on the wall. A simple shape, wings outstretched, born from her childhood games with Amani. Liam's head tilted first, a subtle shift, as if sensing a change in the air. Lucas followed, his fingers pausing on a toy, his face turning toward the kitchen. Nyasha's breath caught. She moved her hands again, the bird's shadow swooping across the wall, its wings fluttering in the light. A soft giggle escaped Lucas, a sound so pure it seemed to crack the mansion's oppressive silence. Liam's lips curved into a smile, his hands reaching out as if to catch the invisible bird. Nyasha's eyes widened, her heart soaring. They felt it, the light, the shadow, the movement. She moved her fingers faster, the bird diving and soaring, and the twins laughed louder, their voices a melody Nyasha hadn't dared hope for. Tears pricked her eyes as she remembered Amani's first laugh, a triumph over darkness. "You're doing it, boys," she whispered, her voice trembling with awe. The kitchen door swung open, and Jacob Whitaker stormed in, his white face taut with urgency, a coffee mug clutched in his hand. He'd heard the laughter, alien, impossible, from the hallway, and it had stopped him cold. His eyes locked on Nyasha, her hands still raised, shadows dancing on the wall. Liam and Lucas, their faces alight with joy, reached out toward the fleeting bird, their giggles echoing. Jacob's mug trembled, coffee sloshing over the rim. "What are you doing to my boy, Anan?" he demanded, his voice a raw mix of shock and fear, as if Nyasha had breached a sacred boundary. His heart raced, torn between disbelief and a fragile, unfamiliar hope. He'd spent years chasing miracles, only to be met with cold verdicts. Could this stranger, this maid from Southside, have found what he could not? Nyasha froze, her hands dropping, the bird's shadow vanishing. Her pulse thundered, fear of dismissal warring with the certainty in her gut. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I was just playing with shadows. I think they can feel the light, the movement." She gestured toward the twins, who still reached out, their smiles fading, but not gone. Jacob's gaze darted to his sons, his breath hitching. Liam's fingers traced the air, as if searching for the bird, while Lucas turned toward his father, his face brighter than Jacob had ever seen. The sight pierced him, a dagger of hope and terror. He'd been told their blindness was absolute, their world forever dark. Yet here they were, responding, alive in a way he hadn't dared dream. He stepped closer, his eyes flicking between Nyasha and the twins. "They're blind," he said, his voice cracking, more to himself than to her. "Dr. Carter said they can't see anything." But the words felt hollow, challenged by the laughter still ringing in his ears. Nyasha met his gaze, her own eyes burning with conviction. "I had a sister, sir," she said softly. She was blind too, but she could feel shadows, sense light through movement. "I think your boys can too." Her words carried the weight of her past, of nights spent guiding Amani through a world others deemed inaccessible. Jacob's chest tightened, memories of his wife Emily flooding back, her promises to show their boys the stars, now lost to the grave. Could this be real? He knelt beside Lucas, his hand hovering over his son's shoulder, afraid to break the moment. "Boys," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Did you feel something?" Lucas turned toward him, his smile faint but undeniable, and Jacob's heart lurched. He looked at Nyasha, her face a mix of hope and defiance, and felt a crack in the wall of despair he'd built around himself. "This can't be possible," he murmured, but the spark in his son's eyes told a different story. Nyasha stood still, her heart pounding, knowing she'd crossed a line but unable to regret it. She'd seen the light in Amani's world, and now she saw it in Liam and Lucas. She wouldn't let it fade. Jacob rose, his mind a storm of doubt and possibility. "Don't do this again," he said, his voice low, but the command lacked conviction. He turned away, coffee forgotten, and strode out, his footsteps heavy with the weight of what he'd witnessed. Nyasha watched him go, her resolve hardening. She'd felt the twins' joy, seen their potential, and no warning could stop her now. The kitchen fell silent, but the echo of laughter lingered, a promise of what might come. Jacob Whitaker's footsteps echoed through the silent mansion as he retreated from the kitchen, the ghost of his son's laughter trailing him like a forbidden melody. The white billionaire's heart pounded, a chaotic rhythm of shock and fragile hope, as he reached his study. The image of Liam and Lucas, their faces alight with joy, reaching for Nyasha's fleeting shadows, burned in his mind. It was impossible. Dr. Leonard Carter had said so, his voice cold and final. They'll never see. Yet Jacob had seen their smiles, heard their giggles, felt a spark of life he'd thought extinguished. He sank into his leather chair, his fingers trembling as they grazed a stack of medical reports, each one a testament to his failure. Could a maid, a stranger from Southside, have pierced the darkness that the world's best doctors could not? The thought was a blade slicing through years of despair, but it also terrified him, for hope was a dangerous thing. Nyasha Williams lingered in the kitchen, her cloth idle on the marble counter, her pulse racing with a mix of triumph and fear. The black woman's hands still tingled from the shadow play, the memory of Liam and Lucas's laughter a beacon in her heart. She'd crossed a line. Jacob's warning rang clear. "Don't do this again." But the echo of her sister Amani's voice, joyful despite her blindness, drowned out his words. Nyasha had watched Amani trace shapes in the air, her fingers chasing sounds and shadows to build a world no one else believed she could see. Nyasha's throat tightened, tears threatening as she recalled Amani's defiant smile. proof that the impossible was only a challenge unmet. Liam and Lucas, white twins lost in their own darkness, had felt her shadows. She couldn't stop now, not when their eyes had sparkled with life. She glanced toward the living room, where the twins sat on the rug, their hands slower now, as if the absence of her shadows had dimmed their spark. Helen, the nanny, still slouched in her armchair, her magazine a shield against the boys' silent world. Nisha's jaw clenched, anger flaring at Helen's indifference. She'd seen it before. Caregivers who treated the disabled as burdens, not souls. Amani had endured such neglect, her spirit nearly crushed until Nyasha taught her to see through touch and sound. Nyasha's resolve hardened, her fear of dismissal giving way to a fierce determination. She would find a way to help these boys, even if it meant defying Jacob's orders. Jacob stared at the medical reports, his fingers hovering over a folder marked Liam and Lucas, initial diagnosis. His chest ached as he opened it, the pages worn from countless nights of desperate searching. A single line buried in a report from when the twins were infants caught his eye. Possible light perception requires further testing. His breath hitched. Dr. Carter had dismissed it, his voice dripping with certainty. Irrelevant. Their condition is absolute. Jacob's hands shook, rage simmering beneath his grief. Had Carter overlooked this? Had he, in his trust, failed his sons? He slammed the folder shut, the sound sharp in the quiet study. Emily's face flashed in his mind, her promise to show their boys the stars, now a cruel mockery. He pressed his palms to his eyes, willing away the tears. He couldn't afford to hope, not again. Nyasha, back in the kitchen, resumed cleaning, her movements mechanical as her mind raced. She thought of Amani's first triumph, when she'd traced a heart in the air, her laughter a rebellion against her blindness. Nyasha had learned then that doctors could be wrong, that their verdicts weren't fate. She stole another glance at the twins, their hands fumbling with tactile toys, their faces dimming without her shadows. She needed to test them again, to see if their response was real. When Helen stepped out to take a call, Nyasha seized her chance. She moved to the living room, her heart pounding, and knelt beside the twins. "Hey, boys," she whispered, her voice soft but urgent. "Want to play a game?" Liam tilted his head, Lucas's fingers pausing, as if sensing her presence. She raised her hands, letting the sunlight from a nearby window cast a new shadow. A simple tree, its branches swaying. Lucas's lips curved, a faint giggle escaping. Liam reached out, his fingers tracing the air, as if chasing the invisible branches. Nyasha's heart soared, tears pricking her eyes. They felt it, just as Amani had. She moved her hands, the tree's shadow dancing, and the twins laughed again, their voices a fragile melody. Nyasha's chest swelled with hope, but fear lingered. Jacob could fire her, Helen could report her. Yet the twins' joy was worth the risk. She whispered, "You're amazing, boys," her voice thick with emotion, echoing the words she'd once said to Amani. Helen's sharp voice cut through the moment. "What are you doing?" she snapped, storming back into the room. Her eyes narrowed, venom in her gaze. "Mr. Whitaker told you to clean, not meddle with his kids." Nyasha stood, her pulse racing, but she held her ground. "They were responding to shadows," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor in her heart. "They can feel light." Helen scoffed, her face twisted with disdain. "You're no doctor. Stick to your job, or I'll make sure you're out of here." Nyasha's fists clenched, anger flaring at the dismissal, but she saw the fear in Helen's eyes. Fear of exposure, of losing control. Nyasha knew then that Helen's indifference wasn't just negligence. It was complicity, a thread tied to something darker. Jacob, in his study, stood and paced, the report's words searing his mind. Possible light perception. He thought of Emily, her gentle hands guiding their newborn sons, her dreams for their future. He'd trusted Carter, poured millions into his clinic, believing it was his only path. But Nyasha's shadows, the twins' laughter, challenged everything. He stormed to the living room, driven by a need to see his sons again. He stopped short, hearing Helen's sharp voice and Nyasha's calm defiance. Peering through the doorway, he saw Liam reaching out, his face alive with a spark Jacob hadn't seen since before Emily's death. His heart lurched, torn between fear of false hope and the pull of possibility. "Enough," he said, his voice low but firm, stepping into the room. "Nyasha, back to work. Now." Nyasha nodded, her eyes meeting his for a fleeting moment, a silent plea for trust. She returned to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she gripped her cloth. She'd seen the spark in Liam and Lucas, felt their potential, and no threat could extinguish it. Jacob watched her go, his mind a storm of doubt and longing. He knelt beside his sons, their faces dimming without Nyasha's shadows. "Boys," he whispered, his voice breaking, "did you feel something?" Lucas turned toward him, a faint smile lingering, and Jacob's chest tightened. He couldn't unsee what he'd witnessed, couldn't unfeel the hope stirring within. Jacob Whitaker stood frozen in the living room, his white face taut with a storm of emotions, as Nyasha retreated to the kitchen, her footsteps soft but resolute, the echo of his own command. "Back to work, now," rang hollow in his ears, drowned out by the memory of Liam and Lucas's laughter, their hands chasing shadows only moments ago. The White twins, 8 years old and blind since birth, had smiled, their faces alight with a joy Jacob hadn't seen since before their mother's death. His heart thundered, torn between the hope Nyasha's actions had sparked and the fear that it was another cruel illusion. He knelt beside his sons, their tactile toys scattered on the rug, and whispered, "What did you feel, boys?" Liam's fingers paused, his head tilting as if searching for the vanished shadows. Lucas's faint smile lingered, a fragile beacon in Jacob's darkness. The white billionaire's chest ached, a father's longing warring with years of shattered dreams. He rose, his gaze lingering on the twins, their faces dimming without Nyasha's presence. The weight of her words, "I think they can feel light," pressed against him, a challenge to everything he'd been told. Dr. Leonard Carter's voice echoed in his mind, cold and unyielding. "Their blindness is absolute." Yet that buried report, noting possible light perception, gnawed at him, a seed of doubt sprouting in the cracks of his despair. Jacob's hands clenched, rage simmering beneath his grief. Had he trusted the wrong people? Had he failed his sons by believing Carter's verdict? He stormed back to his study, the mansion's silence suffocating, and slammed the door. The folder of medical reports lay open, its pages a silent accusation. He traced the faded line again, his fingers trembling. "Requires further testing." Why hadn't Carter pursued it? The question burned, a fire threatening to consume his carefully guarded resignation. Nyasha, in the kitchen, gripped her cleaning cloth, her hands shaking with a mix of fear and defiance. The black woman from South Side felt the weight of Helen's threat. "I'll make sure you're out of here." Like a blade at her throat, yet the twins' laughter fueled her courage. She saw her sister Amani in them, her blind eyes sparkling when Nyasha taught her to trace shapes through sound and touch. Amani had defied doctors' predictions, finding a world beyond her darkness, and Nyasha's heart swelled with the same hope for Liam and Lucas. She'd crossed a line, defied Jacob's orders, but the memory of their giggles, their hands reaching for her shadows, was a fire no threat could extinguish. She glanced toward the living room, where Helen now hovered over the twins, her eyes sharp with suspicion. Nyasha's jaw tightened. She wouldn't let Helen's complicity, or Carter's lies, snuff out the spark she'd seen. Jacob paced his study, his mind a battlefield. The twins' laughter replayed, a melody that clashed with years of sterile diagnoses. He thought of Emily, his late wife, her gentle voice promising their boys a world of stars and sunsets. That promise had died with her, but Nyasha's actions stirred a ghost of it, fragile and terrifying. He sank into his chair, his fingers digging into his palms. "I can't hope again," he muttered, his voice raw. Every failed treatment, every empty promise had carved a wound deeper than the last. Yet the image of Liam reaching for the shadow, Lucas's smile, refused to fade. He grabbed the phone, his hands trembling, and dialed a number he'd found in a forgotten email. A contact for Dr. Sarah Brooks, a pediatric vision specialist at the University of Chicago. "I need a second opinion," he said when she answered, his voice breaking. "My boys, they might not be completely blind." Nyasha, wiping down the kitchen counter, fought the urge to return to the twins. Her heart pounded, torn between fear of losing her job and the certainty that Liam and Lucas could see more than anyone believed. She remembered Amani's first triumph, when she'd traced a heart in the air, her laughter a rebellion against despair. Nasha had fought then, ignoring doctors who dismissed her sister's potential, and she'd fight now. She stole a glance at Helen, who was now whispering into her phone, her eyes flicking toward Nyasha with malice. Nyasha's stomach churned. Helen's threat wasn't idle. She was tied to Carter, a pawn in a game Nyasha was only beginning to understand. But the twins' joy was worth any risk. She resolved to test them again, to prove their potential, but she'd need to be careful. Helen was watching, and Jacob's trust was fragile. Jacob's call with Dr. Brooks was brief but searing. "Bring them in," she said, her voice calm but curious. "If they're responding to shadows, we need to test their light perception immediately." Jacob hung up, his chest tight with a hope he didn't dare embrace. He stood, pacing again, his mind replaying Nyasha's words. "My sister was blind too. She could feel shadows." He wanted to believe her, to cling to the possibility, but fear held him back. He'd trusted Carter, poured millions into his clinic, only to find a buried note that suggested betrayal. His rage flared, a father's fury at the thought that his son's potential had been ignored. He stormed to the living room, needing to see Liam and Lucas again, to anchor himself in their presence. Nyasha, hearing Jacob's footsteps, froze in the kitchen, her claw still in hand. She braced herself, expecting another reprimand, but her heart refused to waver. She'd seen the spark in the twins' eyes, felt their joy, and no one, not Helen, not Carter, could take that away. She moved to the doorway, watching as Jacob knelt beside his sons. "Boys," he said, his voice softer now, "did you like the game?" Lucas turned toward him, his fingers twitching as if seeking the shadow again. Liam's head tilted, a faint smile flickering. Jacob's eyes stung, a tear escaping as he saw Emily in their faces, her hope alive in their tentative joy. He looked up, catching Nyasha's gaze, and for a moment their eyes locked, his filled with doubt, hers with unyielding resolve. "Ms. Williams," he said, standing, his voice low but steady, "we need to talk. Tonight, after your shift." Nyasha nodded, her pulse racing, sensing the weight of his words. She knew this was her chance to prove what she'd seen, to fight for Liam and Lucas as she'd fought for Amani. Jacob turned back to his sons, his heart a battlefield of hope and fear. He couldn't unsee their smiles, couldn't silence the question burning within. What if Nyasha was right? What if his boys could see? The evening shadows stretched long across the Whitaker mansion's living room, mirroring the tension that coiled in Jacob Whitaker's chest as he waited for Nyasha. His white face was a mask of turmoil, the memory of Liam and Lucas's laughter, a sound he'd thought lost forever, clashing with Dr. Leonard Carter's cold verdict. Their blindness is absolute. Jacob paced, his footsteps muffled by the plush rug, his heart a battlefield where hope fought against years of despair. The white twins, Liam and Lucas, slept upstairs, their small faces peaceful yet haunted by the darkness that defined their world. Jacob's fingers clenched, rage simmering at the thought that Carter might have overlooked their potential, that a buried note, possible light perception, had been dismissed to keep his millions flowing. Nyasha's words, "They can feel light," echoed in his mind, a dangerous spark threatening to ignite a fire he wasn't ready to face. Nyasha Williams stood in the kitchen, her cleaning cloth idle, her black hands trembling with a mix of fear and resolve. The day's events, the twins' giggles, their hands chasing her shadow bird, had lit a flame in her heart, one that Helen's threats and Jacob's warnings couldn't extinguish. She saw her sister Amani and Liam and Lucas, her blind eyes bright with defiance, when Nyasha taught her to trace the world through sound and touch. Amani's laughter had been a rebellion against doctors who saw only limits, and Nyasha felt that same rebellion now. She'd defied Jacob's orders, risked her job, but the twins' joy was a beacon she couldn't ignore. As she wiped down the counter, her thoughts raced to Dr. Sarah Brooks, the specialist she'd contacted. Sarah's voice, calm but urgent, had promised answers. "If they're responding to shadows, we need to test them now." Nyasha's heart pounded, her courage a shield against the storm brewing. The doorbell's sharp chime cut through the mansion's silence, startling Jacob. He froze, his pulse quickening. He wasn't expecting visitors, and the late hour felt ominous. He crossed to the foyer, where the housekeeper's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Whitaker, two gentlemen from the medical board are here." Jacob's stomach churned, a premonition of trouble. He opened the door to find two stern-faced men, their badges glinting under the chandelier's light. "Mr. Whitaker," the taller one said, his voice clipped, "we're here about a complaint. Your maid, Nyasha Williams, is accused of practicing medicine without a license." Jacob's blood ran cold, his rage flaring at the thought of Carter's influence. He knew this was no coincidence. Carter's call to Dr. Brooks had been too quick, too defensive. "She's not practicing medicine," Jacob snapped, his voice sharp. "She's a maid." Nyasha, hearing the commotion, stepped into the foyer, her heart sinking as she saw the men. Her black face remained composed, but fear clawed at her insides. She'd expected backlash from Helen, but this, officials from the medical board, was a blow she hadn't foreseen. She thought of Amani, of the doctors who'd dismissed her sister's potential, and her resolve hardened. "Sir," she said, addressing Jacob, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. "I only played with the boys, showed them shadows, they responded." The taller official, Dr. Ellis, raised an eyebrow. "Shadows? You're claiming blind children can see?" His tone dripped with skepticism, but Nyasha stood firm. "They felt the light, the movement. I've seen it before with my sister." Her words carried the weight of her past, a quiet defiance that silenced the room. Jacob's eyes flicked to Nyasha, his anger at the intrusion warring with the hope she'd sparked. He thought of Liam and Lucas, their hands reaching for shadows, their laughter a melody he'd thought lost. "She's telling the truth," he said, his voice low but fierce. "I saw it myself. They laughed. They moved." Dr. Ellis exchanged a glance with his colleague, Dr. Patel, whose pen hovered over a notepad. "Mr. Whitaker," Dr. Patel said, "this is a serious accusation. We need to see evidence." Jacob's jaw clenched, his protective instincts surging. He'd trusted Carter, poured millions into his clinic, only to find a buried note suggesting betrayal. Now these men threatened to snuff out the spark Nyasha had lit. "You want evidence?" he said, his voice rising. "Come see my boys." He led them to the living room, where Helen sat, her face smug as she watched the scene unfold. Jacob's rage flared. She'd betrayed his sons, colluding with Carter for profit. "Helen," he said, his voice icy, "explain yourself." She faltered, her eyes darting to the officials. I only reported what I saw," she stammered. "She's meddling, giving false hope." Nyasha's fist clenched, her heart pounding with anger. "False hope?" she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "I saw them smile, reach for light. That's not false." Her words were afire, fueled by memories of Amani's triumphs, and Jacob felt their heat. He turned to the officials, his voice steady but fierce. "My boys responded to her. That's more than Carter ever gave me." Dr. Ellis frowned, flipping through his notes. "Dr. Carter claims you're endangering your sons with unproven methods," he said. "We need to review their medical records." Jacob's heart lurched, the buried note, possible light perception, flashing in his mind. He nodded, his voice tight. "You'll have them, but I want answers, not accusations." Dr. Patel scribbled a note, his expression softening. "We'll arrange a meeting with Dr. Brooks," he said. "If there's evidence of light perception, we'll investigate Carter's diagnosis." Nyasha's breath caught, hope surging despite the fear. She'd risked everything, but the twins' laughter was worth it. She glanced at Jacob, his face a storm of fury and hope, and knew he was beginning to trust her. As the officials left, Jacob turned to Nyasha, his eyes searching hers. "You've put us in a dangerous spot," he said, his voice low but not unkind. "But I can't ignore what I saw." Nyasha nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of her defiance. "I only want to help them, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Like I helped my sister." Jacob's chest tightened, memories of Emily's promises to their boys flooding back. He wanted to believe, to hold on to the spark Nyasha had ignited, but fear of betrayal loomed. He dismissed Helen for the night, his gaze lingering on the twins' empty toys. "We'll talk tomorrow," he told Nyasha, his voice a fragile bridge between doubt and trust. Nyasha returned to the kitchen, her hands trembling as she resumed cleaning. She thought of Amani, of the doctors who dismissed her and vowed to fight for Liam and Lucas. The officials' visit was a warning, but their response to the twins' potential gave her hope. Jacob watched her go, his heart a tangled knot of fear and possibility. He couldn't unhear his son's laughter, couldn't unsee their smiles. The storm within him raged, but for the first time, he felt a flicker of light. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the Whitaker mansion, casting golden streaks across the living room where Jacob Whitaker stood, his white face etched with a fragile hope. The echoes of last night's confrontation, the medical board's accusations, Nyasha's defiant stand, and his own fierce defense, still reverberated in his heart. The white billionaire's hands trembled as he watched his twin sons, Liam and Lucas, white and blind since birth, play with their tactile toys on the rug. Their faces once blank with despair, now held a faint spark, a remnant of Nyasha's shadow play that had cracked open his world. Jacob's chest tightened, the memory of their laughter a lifeline he clung to. Yet fear gnawed at him. Fear that this hope, like so many before, would crumble under the weight of reality. He'd scheduled a talk with Nyasha today, a chance to understand her claims, but the shadow of Dr. Leonard Carter's verdict loomed, threatening to snuff out the light. Nyasha Williams moved quietly through the kitchen, her black hands steady as she polished the marble counter, but her heart raced with purpose. The medical board's visit had shaken her, Helen's betrayal a bitter sting, yet the twins' giggles, those fleeting bursts of joy, fueled her resolve. She saw her sister Amani in Liam and Lucas, her blind eyes alight with defiance when Nyasha taught her to trace the world through sound and touch. Amani's triumph, when she'd shaped a heart in the air, had been a rebellion against doctors' limits, and Nyasha felt that same rebellion now. She'd risked everything, her job, her future, but the twins' smiles were worth it. As she worked, she stole glances at the living room, where Helen's absence was a small victory. Jacob had dismissed her for the day, a sign he was beginning to trust Nyasha's vision, even if only a sliver. Jacob crossed to the living room, his steps heavy with the weight of his decision. He knelt beside Liam and Lucas, his heart aching as their fingers fumbled with toys, their faces dim but not as lifeless as before. "Boys," he whispered, his voice thick with longing, "can you feel me here?" Lucas tilted his head, his fingers pausing, as if sensing his father's presence. Liam's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile, and Jacob's eyes stung. He thought of Emily, his late wife, her gentle promises to show their sons the stars. Nyasha's shadows had stirred that promise, a fragile thread connecting him to a past he'd thought lost. He stood, his resolve hardening. He couldn't let Carter's lies or Helen's complicity steal this chance. He needed answers, and Nyasha held the key. Nyasha, sensing the shift in the air, set her cloth down and moved to the living room doorway. She watched Jacob with the twins, her heart swelling with hope and fear. She remembered Amani's first victory when she'd traced a star's shape, her laughter a beacon in the dark. Nyasha had fought for her sister, defying doctors who saw only blindness, and she'd fight for Liam and Lucas now. "Mr. Whitaker," she said softly, stepping forward, "you wanted to talk?" Jacob turned, his white face a canvas of doubt and determination. "Yes," he said, his voice low but steady. "Show me what you did yesterday. I need to understand." Nyasha nodded, her pulse quickening, knowing this was her moment to prove the twins' potential. She knelt beside the twins, her black hands moving with careful grace. "Hey, boys," she said, her voice warm. "Let's play the shadow game again." She raised her hands, letting sunlight from the nearby window cast a new shadow, a tree, its branches swaying gently. Liam's head tilted, his fingers reaching out, and Lucas giggled, a sound that pierced Jacob's heart. Nyasha moved her hands, the tree's shadow dancing, and the twins laughed louder, their hands mimicking her movements. Nyasha's eyes filled with tears, memories of Amani flooding back, her sister's joy when she'd felt a shadow for the first time. "They feel it, sir," Nyasha said, her voice trembling with conviction. "They're not completely blind." Jacob's breath caught, his eyes locked on his sons, their faces alive with a joy he'd thought impossible. He knelt beside them, his hands hovering, afraid to break the moment. "Liam, Lucas," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Can you show me?" Lucas reached out, his fingers tracing the air, as if chasing the tree's branches. Liam's smile widened, his head turning toward the light. Jacob's chest heaved, tears spilling down his cheeks. He saw Emily in their faces, her hope reborn in their laughter. "How?" he murmured, turning to Nyasha. "How did you know?" She met his gaze, her eyes fierce with resolve. "My sister, Amani," she said. "She was blind too. I learned to reach her through shadows, sounds. Your boys have that same spark." Her words were a lifeline, pulling Jacob from the abyss of despair. But the threat of Carter loomed, a shadow darker than any Nyasha cast. Jacob stood, his rage rekindling. "Carter said they'd never see," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "He buried a report that suggested otherwise." Nyasha's heart sank, the weight of Helen's betrayal echoing in her mind. "He's protecting his reputation," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "But I've seen what your boys can do. We need to test them properly." Jacob nodded, his resolve solidifying. He'd contacted Dr. Sarah Brooks, and her promise of a thorough evaluation was a beacon he clung to. "I've arranged a meeting with her," he said, "but Carter won't let this go easily." Nyasha's hands trembled, the memory of the medical board's accusations sharp in her mind. She'd risked everything, but the twins' laughter was her anchor. She thought of Amani, of the doctors who'd dismissed her, and vowed to protect Liam and Lucas. "I'll do whatever it takes, sir," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Jacob looked at her, his eyes searching, seeing not just a maid, but a woman who'd ignited a miracle. "You've already done more than anyone," he said, his voice soft but fervent. "But we're not done fighting." The twins, sensing the shift, reached out, their hands brushing Jacob's. He knelt again, pulling them close, their warmth a reminder of what was at stake. Nyasha watched, her heart swelling with hope, tempered by the fear of Carter's influence. She'd seen the spark in Liam and Lucas, and no threat could dim it. Jacob held his sons, his tears falling freely, a father reborn in the light of their joy. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, he felt he wasn't alone. The dawn light crept through the Whitaker mansion's windows, casting a soft glow across the living room where Jacob Whitaker stood, his white face softened by a hope he dared not embrace until now. The memory of Liam and Lucas's laughter, their hands tracing Nyasha's shadows, had become his anchor, a beacon that held firm against the storm of Dr. Leonard Carter's lies. The white billionaire's heart swelled as he watched his twin sons, white and once lost to blindness, now reaching for light with tentative joy. Last night's vow with Nyasha, to fight for his boys, to uncover the truth, burned fiercely within him, a father's resolve tempered by a love reborn. Jacob's chest ached with the weight of their progress, each giggle a thread stitching together the wounds of years spent in despair. He glanced toward the kitchen, where Nyasha's presence had become a quiet strength, and felt a warmth he hadn't known since Emily's passing. Nyasha Williams moved through the kitchen, her black hands steady as she arranged a tray of breakfast. But her heart danced with triumph. The twins' progress, recognizing stars and trees through her shadow play, had ignited a fire no threat could dim. She saw her sister Amani and Liam and Lucas, her blind eyes radiant when Nyasha taught her to feel the world through touch and sound. Amani's laughter, a defiance of doctors' limits, echoed in the twins' giggles, and Nyasha's tears welled as she recalled her sister's first traced heart, a victory over darkness. She'd risked everything, her job, her safety, to reach these boys, and their joy was her reward. As she set the tray down, she caught sight of Jacob watching his sons, his eyes brimming with a love that mirrored her own. Her heart surged, knowing their shared fight had forged a bond deeper than words. Jacob crossed to the living room, kneeling beside Liam and Lucas, their tactile toys now joined by a new game, Nyasha's Shadows. "Boys," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "let's try something today." He raised his hands, mimicking Nyasha's technique, casting a simple star shape on the wall. Lucas giggled, his fingers reaching out, while Liam's smile widened, his head tilting toward the light. Jacob's throat tightened, tears spilling as he saw Emily in their joy, her promise to show them stars reborn. "You're doing it," he whispered, his voice breaking, a father witnessing a miracle he'd thought impossible. He turned to Nyasha, who stood in the doorway, her black face radiant with pride. "You've changed everything," he said, his words heavy with gratitude. Nyasha nodded, her eyes glistening. "It's their strength, sir," she said. "I just gave them a chance." The morning unfolded with a new rhythm, the mansion alive with laughter where silence once reigned. Nyasha joined the twins, guiding their hands to trace shadows, a bird, a tree, a star, each shape a step toward a world they'd been denied. Liam's fingers trembled as he mimicked a bird's wings, his laughter a melody that pierced Jacob's heart. Lucas reached for a star's shadow, his voice soft but clear. "Light." Jacob's breath caught, his tears falling freely. He knelt beside them, his hands brushing theirs, feeling their warmth, their life. He thought of Emily, her gentle smile, and felt her presence in this moment, as if she were guiding them all. Nyasha watched, her heart swelling with memories of Amani, whose triumphs had taught her that love could conquer any darkness. But the shadow of Carter lingered, a threat Nyasha couldn't ignore. She'd learned from Dr. Sarah Brooks that Carter's clinic had profited millions from families like the Whitakers, bearing evidence of hope to keep them dependent. Her anger flared, tempered by the twins' joy. She approached Jacob, her voice steady but urgent. "Sir, Sarah's tests confirm it," she said. "The boys have light perception. Carter hid it to keep your money flowing." Jacob's face darkened, his rage a fire that had smoldered too long. "He betrayed my boys," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I trusted him with their future." Nyasha's heart ached, seeing his pain, but her resolve burned brighter. "We can fight him," she said. "Sarah's ready to testify." Jacob nodded, his eyes fierce with determination. "We'll expose him," he vowed, his voice a father's promise. The day passed in a blur of shadow games and laughter, the twins' progress a testament to Nyasha's courage. In the afternoon, Jacob watched as Nyasha taught Liam to trace a heart's shadow, his small hands steady, his smile radiant. Lucas joined, giggling as he shaped a star. Jacob's chest heaved, a sob escaping as he saw his sons come alive. He stood, crossing to Nyasha, his voice soft but fervent. "You've given them more than sight," he said. "You've given them hope." Nyasha's eyes met his, her tears mirroring his own. "I saw it in them, sir," she said, her voice thick. "Like I saw it in my sister." Their shared gaze held a new understanding, a bond forged in their fight for the twins. As evening fell, Jacob gathered Liam and Lucas in the garden, the air cool and alive with possibility. Nyasha joined them, her black presence a quiet strength beside Jacob's white frame. She raised her hands, casting a star's shadow against the setting sun, and the twins laughed, their hands reaching out. "Star," Liam said, his voice a whisper of wonder. Jacob pulled them close, his tears falling onto their heads. "You're my stars," he said, his voice breaking, Emily's love alive in their joy. Nyasha watched, her heart full, knowing she'd honored Amani's legacy. The fight against Carter loomed, but in this moment they were a family, bound by hope and love. Jacob turned to Nyasha, his eyes shining. "We'll fight for them," he said, his voice steady. "Together." Nyasha nodded, her resolve unyielding. "For them," she said, her voice a vow. The twins' laughter rang out, a melody that drowned out the darkness, and Jacob felt a peace he hadn't known in years. The mansion, once a prison of silence, was now a home, its walls echoing with life. Nyasha's courage had lit a path, and Jacob knew they'd walk it together, no matter what lay ahead. What a journey we've shared with Jacob, Nyasha, Liam, and Lucas. A tale of hope rising from darkness, of courage defying lies, and of a family reborn through love. Did their story touch your heart? Has someone like Nyasha ever sparked light in your life? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We can't wait to hear how this moved you. Hit that like button if their triumph stirred your soul, and subscribe to join us for more stories that ignite hope and change lives. Thank you for being part of this unforgettable tale. for feeling every heartbeat with us. Ring that bell, and we'll meet again soon for another story that'll keep you glued. Until next time, keep chasing the light.